A friend from the Justice Department called me, who I knew, and said, we at Justice were just approached by a twin who had survived Josef Mengele, the Nazi doctor, angel of death's experiments in Auschwitz during the war. He and his twin sister, they live in Westchester, she's still alive, would like to sue the German government because they are spending thousands of dollars a year on extra cost for medical care from what Mengele did to them at Auschwitz, and it's not covered by the German government. German government gives the same payout and restitution to every survivor, whether you were one day at Theresienstadt at the end of the war or you were in Auschwitz for 3 years and experimented on by Mengele. They don't want any other money, they just want their medical costs covered. They'd like to sue Germany or the Mengele family for supporting Mengele. We all thought he was alive. And I said, what a great suit, pro bono lawsuit, I'll give my time. My partner said do it. And in my compulsive way, that started in 1981 and finished in 1985. We got thrown out of federal court before then. They said, sovereign immunity, you can't sue the German government in an American court for what was done in Poland by a German officer 45 years ago. I could never establish then that the Mengele family was supporting the fugitive on the run. They had been his primary support, but we didn't know that until later. So here I was with all of this material that I had gathered during the research for the lawsuit and didn't know what to do with it. And there are two parts to show you how little I knew about publishing. Tricia and I went to a Barnes & Noble on Broadway around the corner from the New York Times. New York Times at that time was on 43rd. Around the corner, half a block north, was a Barnes & Noble, one of the many that has since closed. We went into the store, went to the nonfiction and history section, looked at the wall, at the spines, to see which publisher we thought might fit for a biography of Mengele. It's truly the blind leading the blind. We thought it was McGraw-Hill. Don't know what they were publishing at that time that led me to that. I sent a letter off to McGraw-Hill on my own without an agent that said, I'm a lawyer, had this failed case on Mengele, and I've gathered a lot of documents. And one side step back, the Mengele case became my template for doing work in the future on other books. I didn't know it at the time, because what I realized is that good research and getting great things in terms of information requires you to be there, to make the effort, and sometimes to get lucky. So for instance, in November of 1984, I made my first trip to South America, a research trip. I went to Casa Rosada, the presidential palace in Buenos Aires, the same as people had before me, to ask for the file of Josef Mengele, because there were rumors for years he had lived in Argentina after the war, but nobody could prove it. I didn't know at the time that Simon Wiesenthal got kicked out of there, that the Americans had been told no, the Israelis had been told no, Tuvia Friedman, a Nazi hunter from Haifa, had been told no by the Argentines. But I arrived there through no strategic planning of my own, by coincidence, by serendipity, by good timing, shortly after the military junta had been overthrown over the Falklands, the Malvinas War. A civilian government was in power for the first time in a long time. It was Raúl Alfonsín. They were going through a spasm of democracy. They said, well, why don't you wait for a while and we'll decide this. I sat in a hotel in downtown Buenos Aires for 3 weeks. Tricia went back to New York. It was called the Hotel El Conquistador. It was like $25 a night. And then one night at about 11 o'clock at night, there's a knock on the door. And it turns out there are federal police officers there. They have an unmarked car, it turns out, outside, a blue Falcon, Ford Falcon. That was the car that they used to take the disappeared away in. And they said, come with us. I managed to call Tricia back in New York before I left to say, I'm going with the federal police, because at least I wanted her to know where to tell the U.S. Embassy to look for me. Went down to the federal police. A very grumpy colonel was sitting there. Now it's coming on near midnight. He had obviously been ordered. I had no idea what was going to happen. Been ordered by the military government, by the civilian government, to open up the file to me on Josef Mengele. They took me into a side room, and there was a file folder that opened up 10 years of this fugitive's life. His entry into the country under the alias Helmut Greger, his application in '56 to return to his real name. He went to a court in Buenos Aires as Josef Mengele, his trip to Switzerland to see his former wife and his son, starting a pharmaceutical company in '58, his marriage to his sister-in-law. His brother had died. He was listed in the phone book in '58, all inside the file, before he goes to Argentina. That taught me that sometimes 6 weeks later a British journalist asked to get into the same papers and was told no. The military had gotten its hold back and was able to close it. There was a window there. I'd like to say I was brilliant enough to know that was the window, but I wasn't. It taught me that you have to just sometimes be lucky, but you also have to be at the location. You can't do it remotely. Can't do it today on the internet. There's sometimes you need to do it in person to get the real material. I had 25,000 pages of documents on Mengele. I put that in the letter to the editor at McGraw-Hill, sent it in to them, got a letter back from an assistant editor about 4 weeks later. I didn't know at the time that an assistant editor was like a 23-year-old person who had just signed on for $12,000 a year to work there at the publisher, and said, it sounds very interesting, please come in and talk to my editor. And we did. And they liked it, and they said, you've never written a book. They had the concern that I would write like a lawyer. They said, so why don't you get a co-author? I was open to that. And I was going to give 25%, half of my proceeds to the twins.